My mother's message came through at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I read it 3 times before the words actually sank in. Family dinner this Sunday at the house. Victoria, James, and Charlotte, please arrive by 6. We have so much to celebrate with my successful children. I scrolled up through the family group chat, searching for my name, knowing I wouldn't find it. 23 messages about Mother's Day plans, and Emily Ashford had been erased from every single one. I set my phone down on my small kitchen counter in my studio apartment in Pasadena and stared at the stack of fourth-grade essays I'd been grading. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness. Something cold and clear was settling into my chest, something that felt almost like relief. The next morning, I taught my class like nothing had happened. Mrs. Chen from next door brought her daughter Lily to school late again, apologizing in broken English about the bus, and I smiled and told her it was absolutely fine. I helped Jeremy Martinez sound out the word because for the 100th time, and watched his face light up when he finally got it. I refereed a dodgeball argument at recess and confiscated a phone from Madison Cooper, who'd been texting during silent reading. This was my life now, 4 years after my mother had delivered her verdict on my worth. I'd stopped going to family dinners after that first exclusion, stopped calling, stopped existing in the Ashford universe, where success was measured in stock portfolios and square footage. My sister Victoria was a partner at her law firm in Newport Beach. My brother James ran a tech startup in San Francisco that had just gone public. My younger sister Charlotte had married a real estate developer and spent her days doing hot yoga and redecorating their mansion in Bel Air. And then there was me, making $48,000 a year and living in 400 square feet, teaching kids who thought I hung the moon. I'd like to tell you I didn't care about being cut out, but that would be a lie. Every holiday that passed, every family photo that appeared on Instagram without me in it, every birthday that went uncelebrated, it all carved something out of me. But I'd built a new life from the scraps they'd left behind. I had my kids at school, I had my book club, I had my Saturday morning farmer's market routine and my favorite coffee shop where they knew my order. I dated a little, nothing serious. I'd learned to be alone without being lonely. Or at least that's what I told myself at 3 in the morning when the silence got too loud. What my family didn't know, what they couldn't have known because they'd stopped asking questions about my life, was that I'd been paying attention. 4 years of silence had given me something valuable: invisibility. And invisible people see everything. My mother, Catherine Ashford, was Pasadena royalty. Old money, older connections, the kind of woman who chaired charity galas and had a wing of the art museum named after her. My father had died when I was 19, leaving behind a fortune in commercial real estate and a wife who'd built her entire identity around social status. She'd raised us to be trophies, proof of her superior parenting and breeding. Victoria had delivered with her corner office and television appearances as a legal expert. James had delivered with his tech millions and features in Forbes. Charlotte had delivered with her society wedding and her Instagram perfect life. I'd become a teacher, and in my mother's world, that was the same as becoming invisible.
But here's what nobody tells you about being invisible. You become a ghost in your own family's house. You hear things, you see things, you piece together secrets that were never meant for your ears. Over the past 4 years, I'd watched my family from the outside, scrolling through their social media, hearing gossip from old family friends who still talked to me out of pity, collecting information like others collected stamps. I knew things. I knew that Victoria's perfect marriage was a sham, that her husband Nathaniel had a girlfriend in Los Angeles he visited every Thursday. I knew that James's company was being investigated for securities fraud, something the public wouldn't know for another 6 months. I knew that Charlotte's real estate developer husband was leveraging properties he didn't own, and that the whole empire was built on borrowed money and borrowed time. I knew that my mother's precious charity foundation had accounting irregularities that would make an auditor weep. I knew all of this, and I'd done nothing with the information. Until now. Until that text message at 11:47 p.m. that made something snap inside me like a dry branch.
I didn't want revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't want to hurt them or destroy them. I wanted something much simpler and much more devastating. I wanted them to see me, really see me. And I wanted them to understand exactly what they'd thrown away when they decided I wasn't worth a seat at their table. I wanted them to feel the weight of their own cruelty. And I was willing to wait as long as it took to make that happen. That Sunday, while my family gathered for Mother's Day dinner in the Ashford Mansion in San Marino, I drove to the cemetery where my father was buried. I'd been doing this every Mother's Day since the exile, talking to a marble headstone like it could hear me. "Hey, Dad," I said, sitting cross-legged on the grass in my jeans and old navy t-shirt. "Mom's having another party. Guess I'm still not invited." The irony was that my father would have been proud of me. He'd grown up poor in Nevada, built his fortune from nothing, and always said that money was just a tool, not a measure of a person's worth. He'd loved that I wanted to teach. He died before he could see me actually do it, massive heart attack at 57, but I knew he would have shown up to every parent-teacher conference and school play if he could have. I stayed until the sun started setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have cost a fortune to replicate in any art gallery. Then I drove home to my little apartment and made myself dinner, pasta with jarred sauce and a glass of cheap wine. I was washing my single plate when my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. I answered, expecting a spam call about my car's extended warranty. Instead, I got a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Emily? It's Aunt Patricia, my mother's younger sister, the one who'd moved to Arizona after a falling out with the family decades ago. We'd never been close, but she'd sent me a card when I graduated from college and another when I got my teaching credential. I heard about the Mother's Day situation," she continued. "I still have friends in Pasadena. I wanted you to know that what your mother did is unforgivable, and if you ever need anything at all, you call me." I thanked her, my voice tight, and we talked for almost an hour. She told me stories about my mother that I'd never heard, about how Catherine had always been obsessed with appearances, how she'd cut Patricia off from marrying a school teacher instead of a doctor or lawyer. "She's repeating the pattern with you," Patricia said, "and it's going to destroy her in the end. People like your mother, they build their whole lives on sand, and they never see the tide coming." When I hung up, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was permission. Maybe it was validation. Maybe it was just the knowledge that I wasn't crazy, that my mother's cruelty wasn't something I'd imagined or deserved. Whatever it was, it crystallized into purpose. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to quietly accept my exile and move on with my life. I was going to make them see exactly what they'd done. The opportunity came 2 weeks later, completely by accident. I was at the farmer's market on a Saturday morning buying strawberries from my favorite vendor when I saw Charlotte. She was with her husband, Devin, both of them dressed in matching athleisure that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I started to turn away, to avoid the awkwardness, but Charlotte saw me. For a second, I thought she might pretend she hadn't, but then something flickered across her face, something that might have been shame or guilt, and she walked over. "Emily," she said, and her voice was softer than I'd heard it in years. "Hey." Devin had the grace to look uncomfortable. He mumbled something about checking out the organic honey and disappeared into the crowd. Charlotte and I stood there in the morning sunshine, surrounded by people buying their vegetables and flowers, and for the first time in 4 years, my sister actually looked at me. "I'm sorry," she said finally, "about Mother's Day, about all of it. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know how." I could have made it easy for her. I could have said it was fine, that I understood, that family was complicated. Instead, I said, "You didn't know how to send a text? You didn't know how to call?" She flinched. "It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple, Charlotte. Mom decided I wasn't good enough, and you all just went along with it. You chose her approval over your own sister." I could see tears forming in her eyes, and part of me wanted to stop, to comfort her like I used to when we were kids, and she'd skinned her knee or lost her favorite toy. But the larger part of me, the part that had been building walls for 4 years, stayed cold. Things aren't as perfect as they look, Charlotte said quietly. With Mom, with any of us. You think you're the only one who's struggling? I don't think I'm the only one struggling. I think I'm the only one who got kicked out of the family for it. She opened her mouth to say something else, but her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. I have to take this, she said. And then she was gone, hurrying away through the crowd with her phone pressed to her ear. I watched her go and felt nothing. That was the moment I knew I'd really changed. The old Emily would have chased after her, would have tried to fix things, would have accepted any crumb of affection or acknowledgement. The new Emily just bought her strawberries and went home. But Charlotte's words stayed with me. Things aren't as perfect as they look. I already knew that, of course. I had my file of secrets, my collection of family dysfunction carefully cataloged and stored. But hearing Charlotte admit it, seeing the fear in her eyes when her phone rang, that added a new dimension. They were scared. All of them. They were holding on to their perfect lives with white knuckles, terrified that someone would see the cracks. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't going to expose them. I wasn't going to send anonymous tips to the SEC about James's company, or leak information about Nathaniel's affair, or report my mother's foundation to the IRS. That would be too easy, too clean, too much like something they would do to each other. Instead, I was going to do something much worse. I was going to succeed on my own terms, in my own way, and I was going to make them watch. I started that very afternoon. I'd been writing for years, little stories and essays that I never showed anyone, journal entries and half-finished novels that lived in files on my laptop. I'd told myself I was too busy, too tired, that teaching took all my creative energy. But the truth was, I'd been afraid of trying and failing, afraid of putting myself out there, afraid of giving my family one more thing to judge me for. Now, I had nothing to lose. I pulled out my laptop and opened a file I'd been working on for months, a middle-grade novel about a girl who felt invisible in her own family until she discovered she actually had the power to become invisible and used it to help other overlooked kids.
It was raw and rough, but it was real. It was mine. And it was good. I spent the next 6 months writing like my life depended on it. I got up at 5 every morning and wrote for 2 hours before school. I wrote during my lunch break, sitting in my classroom while my students were at recess. I wrote on weekends and holidays. I wrote through Thanksgiving, which I spent alone with Chinese takeout, and through Christmas, which I spent volunteering at a shelter. I wrote through my mother's birthday and Victoria's 40th birthday party and James's big announcement that his company was expanding internationally. I wrote through all the family moments I wasn't invited to, channeling every bit of rejection and loneliness and anger into something beautiful. By March, I had a finished manuscript. By April, I had an agent who loved it. By June, I had a book deal with one of the big publishers in New York. The advance wasn't huge by New York standards, $60,000, but it was more money than I'd ever seen at once. More importantly, it was validation. Someone who didn't know me, who didn't owe me anything, had read my words and thought they were worth publishing. I wanted to tell someone. I wanted to celebrate. I wanted to call my father, who'd been dead for almost a decade, and hear him say he was proud of me. Instead, I called Aunt Patricia in Arizona. "They're going to have to see you now," she said when I told her the news, her voice fierce with pride. "They're going to have to acknowledge what you've done." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe they'll find a way to dismiss this too. Either way, I'm not doing it for them anymore. I'm doing it for me." But that wasn't entirely true, and we both knew it. Part of me, maybe the biggest part, was absolutely doing this for them. I wanted to walk into that house in San Marino with my success in my hands like a weapon. I wanted to watch my mother's face when she realized that the daughter she'd thrown away had made something of herself anyway.
I wanted Victoria and James and Charlotte to understand that their version of success, their money and status and empty achievements, wasn't the only way. I wanted revenge, but not the kind that destroyed, the kind that proved a point, the kind that said, "You were wrong about me." My book was scheduled to publish in 14 months, in September of the following year. The publisher wanted to position it for the holiday season, for parents buying gifts for their middle schoolers, for teachers building their classroom libraries. They loved that I was actually a teacher. They wanted to do school visits and book festivals. They wanted to make me the face of the campaign. Real teacher writes authentic story about invisible kids. I said yes to all of it. I hired a publicist with part of my advance. I started building my social media presence. I created a website. I did everything I'd watched my siblings do to build their brands, except I was doing it for something that actually mattered. I was doing it for kids like Jeremy Martinez, who struggled to read, for kids like Lily Chen, whose parents worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford the school supplies, for every kid who'd ever felt overlooked or underestimated or invisible. The first person in my family to find out was James. He came across my Instagram account by accident, or at least that's what he claimed when he called me out of the blue on a Thursday night in July. "Emily, it's James." His voice was cautious, like he was approaching a wild animal. "I saw you have a book coming out. That's amazing. I had no idea you were writing." I almost laughed at the absurdity. He had no idea because he'd never asked, because in 4 years he'd never once reached out to see how I was or what I was doing with my life. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It's been in the works for a while." "We should celebrate," he said. "The family, I mean. We should all get together and celebrate." "Does Mom know you're calling me?" The silence on the other end told me everything. "I just think," he started, then stopped. "I think maybe enough time has passed. Maybe we could all move forward." I wondered what he really wanted. If his company troubles had gotten worse, if he needed something from me, or if this was genuine guilt finally surfacing. I wondered, but I didn't ask. "I appreciate the call, James," I said, "but I'm good. I've moved forward already. You all should do the same." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking again, but this time it felt like power instead of fear. They were coming to me now. They were the ones reaching out. The balance had shifted, and they could feel it. Over the next few months, I got similar calls from Victoria and Charlotte. Victoria was direct, almost businesslike. "I heard about your book. Congratulations. We should talk." Charlotte was tearful. "I miss you, Emmy. I miss my sister. Can we please just have coffee?" I deflected them both. I wasn't ready yet. The book wasn't out yet. My success was still theoretical, still something they could minimize or dismiss. But in a year, when it was real, when it was physical copies in bookstores and reviews in magazines and kids across the country reading my words, then I'd be ready to face them. I spent that year becoming someone I barely recognized. I got a better apartment, nothing fancy, but bigger, with an actual bedroom and a small office where I could write. I started going to a salon instead of cutting my hair myself. I bought clothes that fit properly and actually made me feel good. I wasn't trying to become them, to adopt their values or their lifestyle. I was just finally taking care of myself the way I'd always taken care of my students. I was finally believing that I deserved good things. I kept teaching because that was never about the money or the status, that was about the kids. But I also started saying no to the endless committee work and the weekend volunteering and all the ways I'd been filling the emptiness left by my family. I started protecting my time, my energy, my creativity. I started putting myself first. My book came out on September 15th, and the response was better than I could have imagined. The reviews were glowing. The publisher ordered a second printing before the first even hit shelves. Schools started reaching out for visits. A film producer optioned the movie rights. Nothing about it was accidental or lucky. It was good because I'd poured everything I had into it. It was successful because it spoke to something real, something kids needed. But watching it happen still felt surreal. I kept waiting for someone to tell me it was a mistake, that they'd meant to give the book deal to someone else. That old voice, my mother's voice, telling me I wasn't good enough, was hard to silence, even now. The day my book hit the New York Times bestseller list, my mother called. I was in my classroom, decorating the bulletin board with my students' essays about their heroes, when my phone rang. I saw her name on the screen and felt my heart stop. I stepped into the hallway to answer. "Emily?" Her voice was exactly the same, cultured and controlled, with that edge of judgment that had defined my childhood. "I wanted to congratulate you on your book. Quite an accomplishment." "Thank you," I said, because what else could I say? "I think we should talk," she continued, "in person. There are things that need to be said." "Like what, Mom? Like how you erased me from the family? Like how you decided I wasn't successful enough to be your daughter?" I could hear her sharp intake of breath. "You're being dramatic. I never said those things." "You didn't have to say them. You just stopped inviting me to holidays, stopped including me in family photos, stopped treating me like I existed." I was surprised by how calm I sounded, how clear. 4 years ago, I would have been crying. Now, I was just stating facts. "I made some mistakes," she said, and the admission must have cost her. Catherine Ashford didn't apologize. She didn't admit fault. "I let my disappointment cloud my judgment. But you're my daughter, Emily. You'll always be my daughter. And now that you've achieved something worthwhile, I think we can move past this unpleasantness." Worthwhile. The words landed like a slap, but they also clarified everything. She wasn't sorry. She was just recalculating my value. I'd become successful enough to acknowledge again, so she was willing to let me back into the family. It had nothing to do with love or regret or genuine reconciliation. It was just another transaction in the Ashford ledger.
"I'll think about it," I said, though I had already made my decision. "I have to get back to my class." I hung up before she could respond, before she could try to manipulate or guilt or charm me into submission. I went back into my classroom where my students were waiting, 23 fourth graders who thought I was the best teacher in the world, and I felt something settle in my chest. This was my family now, these kids who needed me, who saw me, who thought teaching was the most important job anyone could have. My mother could keep her mansion and her charity galas and her conditional love. I didn't need any of it anymore. Except that it wasn't entirely true either, because late that night, lying in bed in my new apartment, I realized I wasn't done. I'd proven I could succeed without them. I'd shown them they were wrong about me. But I hadn't made them feel it yet. I hadn't made them understand the full weight of what they'd lost when they chose status over family. And I was starting to realize that maybe that understanding would never come from me. Maybe it would have to come from somewhere else entirely. The next morning, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "We need to talk about your family." I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me open it. Inside was a single paragraph. "My name is Catherine Morrison. I'm an investigative journalist working on a story about nonprofit fraud in Southern California. Your mother's foundation has some irregularities that I think you should know about. I'd like to talk to you, off the record, about what you know. I understand if you're not interested, but I thought you deserved a chance to tell your side of the story before this goes public." Attached was a link to her credentials, articles in the Los Angeles Times, awards for investigative journalism, a track record of exposing corruption in high places. This was real. This was happening, and I had a choice to make. I could delete the email. I could pretend I never saw it. I could let whatever was going to happen to my mother happen without my involvement.
I could be the bigger person, the one who didn't participate in the destruction of her own family no matter how much they'd hurt me. Or I could respond. I could tell this journalist what I knew. I could be the final push that brought my mother's carefully constructed world crashing down. I could be the instrument of her destruction, just like she'd been the instrument of mine. I stared at that email for hours. I taught my class on autopilot, my mind spinning through scenarios and consequences. I thought about my father, about what he would want me to do. I thought about my students, about the kind of person I wanted to be for them. I thought about all the sleepless nights and lonely holidays and moments of crushing rejection that had defined the last 4 years of my life. And then I thought about something Aunt Patricia had said on that first phone call. People like your mother, they build their whole lives on sand and they never see the tide coming. Maybe the tide was coming whether I helped it or not. Maybe my mother's sins would catch up with her eventually, with or without my testimony. Or maybe this journalist was reaching out to me precisely because I was the missing piece, the daughter with nothing to lose, the one person who might actually tell the truth. I closed my laptop without responding. I needed more time. I needed to think. I needed to figure out who I wanted to be in this story, the victim, the hero, or something else entirely. But as I walked home that evening, past the coffee shop that knew my order and the bookstore where my book was displayed in the window, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt powerful. Not because of my book or my success or even my potential revenge, but because for the first time in my life, I had a choice. I could hurt them the way they'd hurt me, or I could be better than that. And nobody, not my mother or my siblings or anyone else, could make that choice for me. The question was, what would I choose? And what would that choice cost me? I didn't respond to Catherine Morrison's email for 3 days. In those 72 hours, I taught my students about the Revolutionary War, graded spelling tests, and supervised a heated playground debate about whether dodgeball should be banned. I went through the motions of my normal life while my finger hovered over the reply button 100 times. On the third night, I finally wrote back, "I'll meet with you, but I need to know exactly what you have before I say anything." We met at a coffee shop in Glendale, neutral territory halfway between our worlds. Catherine was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a recorder she placed on the table between us with my permission. "I appreciate you coming," she said. "I know this must be difficult." I didn't tell her that difficult didn't begin to cover it. Instead, I asked her to show me what she had. The documents she spread across the table told a story I'd suspected but never confirmed. My mother's foundation, which supposedly funded arts programs for underprivileged children, had been funneling money into private accounts for years. Not huge amounts, nothing that would trigger immediate red flags, but consistent diversions that added up to nearly $2 million over a decade. "The thing is," Catherine said, leaning forward, "your mother is careful. Everything's technically legal, just morally bankrupt. She pays herself a salary that's astronomical for a nonprofit this size. She charges the foundation for expenses that are personal. She's created a system where she looks like a philanthropist while basically running a private piggy bank." I stared at the numbers, at the careful accounting that showed my mother's true priorities. "Why do you need me?" I asked. "You have all this documentation." "Because a story about financial irregularities at a small charity foundation doesn't move the needle," Catherine said bluntly. "But a story about how Catherine Ashford, Pasadena's most prominent socialite, built her reputation on helping poor kids while cutting her own daughter out of the family for actually teaching those kids, that's a story people care about. That's the human angle that makes this matter." So that was it. I wasn't being asked to provide information. I was being asked to be the emotional center of an exposé. I was being asked to go public with my family's dysfunction, to let strangers pick apart my pain and judge my mother's character based on how she'd treated me. It should have been an easy decision. They'd hurt me. They deserved to be exposed. But sitting there in that coffee shop, looking at Catherine's eager face, I felt sick. I need time, I said, gathering my things. This isn't something I can decide right now. Catherine nodded, though I could see her disappointment. I understand, but Emily, you should know that I'm running this story with or without you. I have enough to publish. Your participation would just make it more complete, more human. Think about all the kids who donate their allowance to your mother's foundation thinking they're helping other children. Don't they deserve to know the truth? She was right, of course, but she was also manipulating me the same way my family had always manipulated me, making me feel responsible for fixing their mistakes. I left without promising her anything and drove home through the glittering Los Angeles evening, past mansions and palm trees and people living lives I'd never understand. When I got home, there was a message on my phone from Charlotte. "Emmy, please call me. It's important. It's about Mom." I called her back, my heart pounding. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong exactly," Charlotte said, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "But Mom's been asking about you. She wants to have lunch, just the two of you. She said she wants to make things right." I almost laughed. After 4 years of silence, after I'd become successful enough to acknowledge, after a journalist had started asking questions, now my mother wanted to make things right? Did she say why? Did she say what changed? Charlotte hesitated. "I think she knows something's coming. She's been paranoid lately, asking questions about who we've talked to, what we've said. Victoria thinks someone might be investigating the foundation." So my mother had sensed the danger and was trying to get ahead of it. She wanted to bring me back into the fold before I could become a problem. She wanted to neutralize me with forgiveness and family dinners to make sure I wouldn't talk to anyone who might damage her reputation. It was brilliant, really. Classic Catherine Ashford strategy. "Tell her I'll think about it," I said to Charlotte, "but I'm not making any promises." After I hung up, I pulled out my laptop and started writing. Not an email to Catherine Morrison, not a response to my mother, just thoughts, raw and unfiltered, about what I really wanted from all of this. I wrote about the little girl I'd been, desperate for my mother's approval. I wrote about the teenager who'd chosen teaching because she genuinely wanted to help kids, not because she wanted to disappoint her family. I wrote about the woman I'd become in exile, stronger and sadder and more herself than she'd ever been. And I wrote about what justice would actually look like. The truth was, I didn't want to destroy my mother. I wasn't that person. But I also couldn't pretend that what she'd done was okay. I couldn't let her sweep this under the rug with a lunch and an apology that wasn't really an apology. I needed her to understand, truly understand, what she'd done to me. And I needed to know that I'd done the right thing, whatever that turned out to be. The next morning, I called Catherine Morrison. "I'll participate in your story," I said, "but on 2 conditions. First, I want to review anything that quotes me before publication. Second, I want you to include information about what the foundation should be doing. I want you to profile teachers who are actually making a difference, schools that actually need funding. I don't want this to just be a takedown. I want it to show what real philanthropy looks like." Catherine agreed immediately, probably relieved that I was cooperating at all. We scheduled a formal interview for the following week. Then I did something I hadn't done in 4 years. I called my mother directly and agreed to have lunch. We met at her club, of course, where she was queen and everyone knew her name. I showed up in a dress I'd bought with my advance money, my hair professionally styled, looking more like an Ashford than I had in years. I wanted her to see what she'd missed, who I'd become without her approval. My mother was waiting at her usual table, and when she saw me, something flickered across her face. Pride? Regret? I couldn't tell. "Emily," she said, standing to air-kiss both my cheeks, "you look wonderful. Success suits you." "Thanks, Mom." I said, sitting down and accepting the menu I didn't need. I already knew I wouldn't be able to eat anything. We made small talk for a few minutes, dancing around everything that mattered. She asked about my book, and I gave her the highlights. She told me about Charlotte's latest decorating project and Victoria's case that made the news. It was all surface, all performance, exactly like our relationship had always been. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Why am I here, Mom? What do you actually want?" She set down her water glass with careful precision. "I want my daughter back. I want us to be a family again. I know I made mistakes, Emily. I let my expectations cloud my judgment. But you've proven yourself now. You've shown that you can be successful in your own way. I'm ready to move forward if you are." There it was again. You've proven yourself. As if my worth as a human being was dependent on a book deal and a bestseller list. As if 4 years of teaching kids and making a difference meant nothing until it came with external validation. "What about before the book?" I asked quietly. "What about when I was just a teacher making $48,000 a year? Was I not your daughter then?" She looked uncomfortable. "You know I've always valued achievement. Your father did too. We raised you children to excel, to make something of yourselves." "Dad would have been proud of me," I said, and my voice cracked despite my best efforts. "He would have come to my classroom and met my students. He would have understood that teaching is valuable work, that success isn't just about money." My mother's face hardened.
Don't tell me what your father would have thought. I was married to him for 28 years. And he died before he could see what you'd become, I said, before he could see you choose status over your own child. The words hung between us like broken glass. Around us, the club continued its genteel afternoon, people eating their Cobb salads and drinking their iced teas, oblivious to the small family drama unfolding in their midst. My mother recovered first, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I gave you everything. The best schools, the best opportunities. If you chose to throw that away for a mediocre career, that's not my fault." And there it was, the truth she'd been dancing around. She didn't think she'd done anything wrong. She thought I was the one who'd failed, who'd disappointed, who'd chosen wrong. She thought this lunch was about me earning my way back into her good graces, not about her acknowledging the harm she'd caused. I stood up, suddenly exhausted. "I'm doing an interview with Catherine Morrison from the LA Times. She's writing a story about your foundation, and she wanted to talk to me about our family. I thought you should know." The color drained from my mother's face. "You wouldn't." "I already did. It publishes next month." I picked up my purse, my hands steady even though my heart was racing. "You taught me that success is the only thing that matters, Mom. Well, I'm successful now. I'm successful enough that people care what I think. I'm successful enough that my story matters. You should be proud." I walked out of that club with my head high, past the women who'd watched me grow up, past the life I'd been born into and rejected. My phone started ringing before I even got to my car. Victoria first, then James, then Charlotte, all of them panicking, all of them wanting to know what I'd done. I didn't answer any of them. I drove back to Pasadena, back to my apartment, and I sat on my couch and cried for the first time in months. Not because I regretted what I'd done, but because it was finally over. The waiting, the hoping, the secret belief that maybe someday they'd realize their mistake and come back for me, it was all over. I'd made my choice. I'd chosen truth over family, integrity over acceptance, and there was no going back. The article published 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in November. The headline read, "Pasadena Philanthropists Foundation Under Fire: How Catherine Ashford Built Her Reputation on the Backs of Disadvantaged Children." It was devastating. Catherine had done her homework, interviewing former employees of the foundation, reviewing years of tax documents, talking to families who'd been promised scholarships that never materialized.
And yes, she'd included my story. Not all of it, just the key points. Successful children welcomed, teacher-daughter exiled, the irony of a woman who claimed to champion education, cutting off her own daughter for choosing to educate. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The foundation's board demanded my mother's resignation within 48 hours. The charity evaluators who'd given the foundation high marks launched investigations. Other journalists picked up the story, expanding it, adding details, interviewing more sources. My mother's name, which had been synonymous with philanthropy and grace, became shorthand for hypocrisy. Victoria tried to do damage control, appearing on local news to defend our mother's intentions, if not her execution. James stayed silent, probably too worried about his own legal troubles to wade into more controversy. Charlotte called me crying, begging me to make a statement defending Mom, to say I'd been misquoted or that things weren't as bad as they seemed. I didn't make any statements. I didn't defend or attack. I'd said what I needed to say in Catherine's article, and now I was done. I went back to teaching my fourth graders, to the work that had sustained me through everything else. My students had made me cards when my book came out. They decorated my classroom with construction paper congratulations signs. They didn't care about my family drama or my mother's fall from grace. They just cared that I showed up every day and helped them learn to read and write and think. But the story wasn't over. 2 weeks after the article published, Charlotte showed up at my apartment unannounced. I almost didn't let her in, but something in her face stopped me. She looked smaller somehow, like the polished veneer had been stripped away to reveal someone young and scared underneath. "I'm leaving Devon," she said, standing in my doorway with no preamble. "The real estate empire is collapsing. It was all borrowed money and fake valuations. We're going to lose everything, the house, the cars, all of it." I stepped aside and let her in. She collapsed on my couch and told me everything. How Devon had been lying for years about the state of his business. How she'd known something was wrong but had been too scared to ask questions. How she'd built her entire identity around being Mrs. Devon Hartley, society wife and Instagram influencer, and now she didn't know who she was without it. "I should have stood up for you," she said finally, tears streaming down her face. "When Mom cut you out, I should have said something. I should have chosen you over her approval. I'm so sorry, Emmy. I'm so sorry." I sat down next to her and handed her a tissue. I wanted to stay angry. I wanted to hold on to my hurt and my righteousness. But looking at my baby sister, the one I'd protected from bullies and helped with homework and taught to ride a bike, I felt the anger start to crack. "What are you going to do?" I asked. She laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "I don't know. I've never had a job. I have a degree in art history that I've never used. I have no skills except decorating houses and posting on Instagram." She looked around my small apartment, at my second-hand furniture and my walls covered in student artwork. "How did you do it? How did you start over?" "I didn't start over," I said. "I just kept going. I taught my classes, and I wrote my book, and I built a life that was mine. It wasn't always easy, and it definitely wasn't always happy, but it was real." Charlotte nodded, wiping her eyes. "Can you teach me? Can you show me how to do that?" We talked for hours that night. I made tea and we ordered pizza, and for the first time in years, we were just sisters, not competitors, not representatives of different versions of success, just two women trying to figure out their lives. I told her she could stay with me while she figured things out. I helped her set up a resume. I connected her with a friend who worked at an art gallery and was looking for an assistant. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And watching her take those first tentative steps toward independence, I felt something shift inside me. The revenge I'd wanted, the dramatic confrontation where my family realized what they'd lost, it hadn't looked anything like I'd imagined. But maybe it had been more powerful for being quieter, more personal. Over the next few months, my family slowly imploded in the exact way I'd once cataloged but never acted on. James's company was charged with securities fraud, and he settled out of court, losing most of his fortune in the process. Victoria's husband left her for his girlfriend, and the divorce was expensive and public. My mother resigned from every board she'd ever served on and essentially went into hiding, unable to show her face at the clubs and galas that had defined her life. And through it all, Charlotte stayed in my apartment, slowly building a new life. She got the gallery job and discovered she was actually good at it. She started going to therapy, she joined a book club and made friends who didn't care about her last name or her social status. She became, slowly, the person she might have been if she'd never been an Ashford. One Sunday morning in March, almost a year after everything had fallen apart, Charlotte and I were making pancakes in my kitchen when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered it anyway. "Emily, it's your mother." I hadn't heard her voice since that lunch at the club. Charlotte froze, spatula in hand, watching my face. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "I want to apologize. A real apology, not the non-apology I gave you before. I was wrong. About you, about teaching, about what matters in life. I was so focused on appearances and achievements that I forgot the most important achievement of all, being a good mother, and I failed at that." Her voice cracked on the last words, and I realized she was crying. Catherine Ashford, who never showed weakness, who controlled every situation and every emotion, was crying on the phone to the daughter she'd exiled.
"I don't expect you to forgive me," she continued. "I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. Not because of your book or your success, but because you became a good person, despite my best efforts to make you into something else. You became exactly who your father hoped you'd be." I looked at Charlotte, who was crying too now, and felt my own eyes fill with tears. "I appreciate that, Mom," I said. "I really do." "Is Charlotte there?" she asked. "I've been trying to reach her." I handed the phone to my sister and walked out onto my small balcony, giving them privacy. I could hear Charlotte's voice through the window, soft and forgiving, and I knew she was giving our mother something I couldn't give yet. Maybe someday, but not today. That afternoon, Victoria called, then James, both of them with their own versions of apology, their own acknowledgments of what they'd been too blind or too self-absorbed to see. I listened to them all, accepted their words, but I didn't promise anything. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't a switch you could flip. It was a process, slow and painful and not always linear. Some days I felt generous and open to rebuilding. Other days I remembered 4 years of holidays alone and felt the anger fresh and sharp. But here's what I learned in those months of watching my family's empire crumble. Karma doesn't look like what you expect. It's not dramatic and immediate. It's not perfectly timed to make you feel vindicated. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes it hurts innocent people along with the guilty ones. My mother lost everything she cared about, but she also lost herself, and having to rebuild from that devastation was its own kind of justice. A year and a half after the article published, my second book came out. This one was about a girl whose family falls apart, and she has to figure out who she is beyond her last name. It was more personal than the first, more raw, and it did even better. My publisher wanted a third book, schools wanted more visits, my agent was fielding offers for speaking engagements and workshops. I was becoming the kind of successful that couldn't be dismissed or minimized. But the success wasn't what mattered anymore. What mattered was that I'd found my voice. I'd learned to tell my own story instead of letting others define it for me. I'd discovered that being rejected by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally didn't mean you were unlovable. It just meant they were broken in ways you couldn't fix. One Saturday in June, I was at the farmer's market, buying strawberries from my favorite vendor, when I saw her. My mother, dressed simply in jeans and a blouse I'd never seen her wear before, no makeup, no jewelry, looking smaller and older and somehow more real than I'd ever seen her look. She saw me at the same time, and for a second we just stared at each other across the crowded market. Then she walked over, slowly, like she was afraid I might run.
"Hi," she said simply. "Hi," I replied. We stood there in the morning sunshine, and I could see she wanted to say something, maybe apologize again, or explain, or make promises about the future. But instead, she just asked, "How are your students this year?" And that question, that simple acknowledgement of the work I did and the life I'd chosen, broke something open inside me. "They're good," I said. "I have this one kid, Danny, who reminds me of Dad. Determined, stubborn, won't quit until he gets it right." She smiled, and it was sad but genuine. "Your father would have loved that. He would have loved knowing you were teaching kids like that." We talked for 20 minutes about my students and her therapy and Charlotte's new job and the small, normal things that made up our days. We didn't talk about the article or the foundation or the years of pain. We didn't promise to rebuild our relationship or pretend that everything was fine.
We just talked, like two people who used to know each other and were slowly learning who they'd become. When we said goodbye, she hugged me, and I let her. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. That night, I sat down to write. Not a book this time, just a journal entry, trying to process everything that had happened. I wrote about revenge and redemption, about justice and forgiveness, about the messy, complicated truth of loving people who hurt you. And I realized that the comeback I'd wanted, the dramatic moment where I proved them all wrong, had been happening all along. It had been happening every day I woke up and chose to keep going. Every day I taught my students and wrote my stories and built a life that was mine. Every day I refused to let their rejection define my worth. That was the real victory, not the bestseller lists or the exposed foundation or the public apology. The real victory was becoming someone I was proud to be, someone who could look in the mirror and know that I'd stayed true to myself even when it cost me everything. I'd lost a family and found myself. I'd been rejected and learned to stand alone. I'd been invisible and made myself impossible to ignore. And now, finally, I was free. Free to forgive or not forgive. Free to rebuild relationships or walk away. Free to write my own story instead of living in the shadow of someone else's expectations. The summer after my second book came out, Charlotte moved into her own apartment. It was small, like mine had been, but she decorated it herself and filled it with secondhand furniture and plants she was learning to keep alive. On moving day, I helped her carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs, and we ordered pizza and sat on her floor eating from the box because she didn't have a table yet. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for letting me stay, for teaching me that it's okay to start over, for showing me that success doesn't look like what Mom told us it had to look like." "You did the work yourself," I told her. "I just gave you a couch to sleep on." She laughed. "You gave me a lot more than that. You gave me permission to be someone different, to want different things." We sat in comfortable silence, eating our pizza, and I thought about how strange life was, how the worst thing that ever happened to me, being cut out of my family, had also been the thing that set me free, how revenge had turned into redemption without me even noticing, how the family that rejected me had slowly, painfully been rebuilt into something healthier and more honest. That fall, my mother started volunteering at an after-school program in a low-income neighborhood. She didn't tell anyone, didn't post about it on social media or use it to rebuild her reputation. She just showed up 3 afternoons a week and helped kids with their homework. Charlotte told me about it, and I didn't know what to feel. Was it genuine? Was it penance? Was it just another version of the same performance, a different audience for the same carefully curated image? I decided it didn't matter. Whatever her reasons, kids were getting help. And if it changed her, if it taught her something she should have learned decades ago, then maybe that was its own kind of justice. Victoria and James both reached out periodically. Awkward phone calls where we caught up on surface details and avoided talking about anything real. I accepted their calls and kept them at arm's length. Maybe someday we'd be close again. Maybe someday I'd trust them enough to let them back into my life in a meaningful way.
But I didn't need them anymore, and that made all the difference. My third book published to even better reviews. The film version of my first book went into production. I got offered a teaching position at a better school with a better salary, and I took it because I could finally afford to have a retirement account and health insurance that didn't make me panic. I started dating someone I met at a teacher conference, someone who thought my career was impressive and important, who listened to stories about my students and didn't once suggest I was wasting my education. Life was good. Not perfect, not without complications, but genuinely, honestly good. And the best part was that I'd built it myself. Every piece of it was mine, earned through work and choice and determination. Nobody had given it to me. Nobody could take it away. 2 years after everything fell apart, I hosted Thanksgiving at my apartment. Charlotte came, of course. Victoria came, tentative and apologetic. James came with his new girlfriend, a teacher he'd met at a conference I'd recommended. And my mother came, bringing a pie she'd made herself and wearing a dress that probably cost less than my monthly grocery bill. We were awkward at first, all of us trying to navigate this new version of our family. But then Charlotte made a joke, and James laughed, and suddenly we were just people sharing a meal. Not the Ashfords of San Marino, not the perfect family from the Christmas cards, just flawed humans trying to do better. During dinner, my mother stood up to make a toast. "To Emily," she said, her voice steady, "for being brave enough to tell the truth, for building a life that matters, for teaching all of us what success really looks like." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was softer, "and for being willing to let us back in, even though we didn't deserve it." I raised my glass and looked around the table at these people who'd hurt me and disappointed me and ultimately taught me who I really was. To second chances, I said, and to becoming who we're meant to be. That night, after everyone had left and I was cleaning up the dishes, I thought about the girl I'd been 4 years ago, the one who'd read that text message about Mother's Day and felt her world collapse. I thought about all the tears and anger and lonely holidays. I thought about the revenge I'd planned and the justice I'd sought, and the complicated, messy reality of how it had all unfolded. And I realized that the best revenge had been living well. The best comeback had been refusing to let their rejection break me. The best justice had been becoming someone I was proud to be. I didn't need them to acknowledge what they'd done anymore. I didn't need them to understand what they'd lost. I just needed to keep being Emily Ashford, teacher and writer, helper of kids and teller of stories, the daughter who'd been thrown away and had become more valuable for it. The next morning, I woke up early and wrote the dedication for my 4th book. It was simple, just one line. For everyone who's ever been told they weren't enough, you are. You always were. I thought about all the kids I'd taught over the years, all the invisible ones who thought nobody saw them. I thought about the teachers working 3 jobs and the parents struggling to give their children opportunities. I thought about everyone who'd been judged and dismissed and told their dreams didn't matter. This was for them. All of it. The books and the success and the platform I'd built. Not revenge against my family, but revolution for everyone who'd ever been made to feel small. And as I wrote, the sun came up over Pasadena, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and I knew with absolute certainty that I'd made the right choice. Not the easy choice, not the safe choice, but the right one. I'd chosen truth over comfort. I'd chosen integrity over acceptance. I'd chosen to be myself, fully and completely, regardless of the cost. And in the end, that choice had given me everything that mattered. Not their approval, but my own. Not their love, but self-respect. Not their family, but a life worth living. The girl who'd been cut out of the family photo had written herself into a bigger story. And this time, nobody could erase her. This time, she was the author, and she was writing her own ending. The moral of my story wasn't about revenge or even about forgiveness. It was simpler than that. Your worth isn't determined by other people's recognition of it. Your value doesn't decrease when someone can't see it. And sometimes the greatest gift anyone can give you is rejecting you from a life that would have made you smaller. My mother thought she was punishing me by cutting me out. What she actually did was set me free. Free to discover who I really was. Free to build a life that mattered. Free to write stories that would reach millions of children and maybe, just maybe, help them understand that being different isn't the same as being wrong. That was my comeback. That was my revenge. That was my justice. Not a single dramatic moment, but 1,000 small choices to keep going, to keep growing, to keep becoming. And in the end, it was more than enough. Before you go, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm curious to see. I appreciate every one of you being here. I'll meet you again in the next story very soon. Stay encouraged, stay fearless, and keep moving ahead.